I was born and raised in a small but harsh town called Gray Park. This place is not for the weak. Every day here is a struggle for survival. The streets were paved not just with asphalt, but with challenges that break those who can't stand their ground. In Gray Park, no one expected mercy. My father was a simple worker, strict in few words. My mother worked in a store, but her role in our family was support, respect, and care. There was no place for weakness in our home, and from an early age, I learned that if you don't protect yourself, you'll be destroyed. Gray Park raised its residents harshly. Every alley, every cracked wall, every dark arch said the same: you're either a victim or a predator. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and children grew up faster than they should have. I was one of them. The streets became my teacher. On them, I encountered my first blood, my first fear, and my first pride in having survived. My father often said, "It doesn't matter how many times you fall. What matters is how quickly you get up." He wasn't a philosopher. He just knew how the world worked. His hands were always calloused, and his voice sounded like rough sandpaper. He rarely praised me, but when he did, I felt like I could move mountains. My mother, on the other hand, was the quiet, warm light in our home. Her kindness was salvation, but she never let her softness stop me from learning to defend myself. When I became a teenager, life in Gray Park began to change for me. One evening, on my way home, I ran into a group of local guys. They decided I was too confident and wanted to test how far my courage would go. That was when I first realized that fear is a weapon if you use it right. I didn't defeat them, but I didn't give up either. The next day, no one dared look down on me. That was when I began to understand that strength in Gray Park isn't just physical power. It's the ability to stand your ground when everything is against you. Every fight, every argument, every street conflict became bricks in the wall I was building around myself. And then Melissa appeared. She wasn't from Gray Park. Her smile didn't know pain. Her eyes hadn't seen as much dirt as mine. We met by chance. She was at a cafe with her friends, and I ducked in to escape the rain. She was laughing at something, and her laugh seemed to fill the whole room. She was beautiful and smart, with ambitions that could change her life. I wanted to be near her, to be part of her world, so far from the dirt of Gray Park. We started dating, and I believed that with her, things could be different. She inspired me to dream, to see life being the fight for survival. I made plans, thought about the future, imagined how we would leave Gray Park and start over. But Gray Park doesn't let go of its children so easily. Melissa turned out to be different from what I had imagined. Her ambitions, which I had initially seen as inspiration, turned out to be weapons. She taught me a painful lesson. You can trust no one but yourself. I stood there, as if chained to the spot, unable to take a single step. Melissa continued to gather her hair, as if nothing was happening, as if this conversation had never taken place. Slowly, with complete calm, she worked on her hairstyle, and every movement of hers only intensified the pain spreading inside me. It wasn't just indifference. It was complete and utter alienation. Every glance, every movement seemed not just foreign, but hostile. With each passing moment, her presence deepened the emptiness that was eating away at me from the inside. "You don't understand," I said, barely holding myself together. My voice sounded as though I were speaking through force, through clenched teeth. I couldn't allow myself to shout, but every word came out with such pressure that it felt like it could tear me apart. "You don't understand what you're doing, Melissa." She didn't even look at me, continuing to apply lipstick as if I were nothing more than another shadow in her life. This indifference was deadly. I felt as if every movement she made, almost mechanical, carefree, was tearing away everything that was left of our connection. And in this simple act, which had once been so familiar, I was left with nothing but pain. "Are you out of your mind?" Her voice was flat, but I couldn't help but catch a slight hint of mockery, almost contempt. She finally turned toward me, and her eyes met mine. There was no regret, no remorse in them, only emptiness. "Don't you get what I'm saying?" I felt everything I had been holding inside come rushing out. I clenched my teeth and let out a deep breath. "You say it like you don't care. You say it as if I don't matter, as if everything between us means nothing." She stared at me, not hiding her gaze, but in her eyes I saw nothing that resembled love or even attachment. All I could read in her eyes was endless alienation, and that was worse than any insult. "I'm tired." Her words pierced me like a knife. There was no anger in them, just coldness. "I'm tired of your expectations, your demands, your endless efforts. You're always trying to change something, but all I want is to live. Not survive, but live." I stepped closer to her, My fist clenched, and I barely held myself back. My voice became sharp, almost a scream. Survive? You seriously say that, Melissa? I felt the tension building. I'm fighting so we can get out of this town, out of this life. Do you think someone else will solve all your problems? Do you think someone will save you from this abyss you're sinking into? Her gaze became cold, and I saw she had already made her decision. She didn't back down. Her words sounded like a verdict. You're always fighting, but you don't see that you're destroying us. You don't see me. You don't see how I'm drowning in this life where there's no place for us. You're fighting with the city, with yourself, and all I want is to be alive. My fingers clenched into fists, and I felt something break inside me. Everything I knew and believed in was crumbling in that moment, and I couldn't do anything about it. Do you think another man will give you what I can't? I couldn't hold back the fury that exploded from within me. Do you really think someone will save you from yourself? She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained cold, almost indifferent. Maybe, her voice was quiet, without any fight. Maybe he'll show me how to live, not just survive. He'll give me what you can't. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped closer to her again, and my words came out with fury and despair that I couldn't control. You really think someone will fix everything? That it won't turn out to be the same? You've destroyed everything, Melissa, everything. You can't hide from what you've done. Her silence was like a blow, as if she had already accepted it as inevitable. You can't forbid me this. Her words were the final verdict. I saw her turn back to the mirror. As if I weren't even there, she continued applying makeup, as if this scene was nothing more than an annoyance to be overcome. I stood behind her, feeling the anger and pain mix into a searing cocktail that tore me apart from the inside. Every gesture she made, every impenetrable line in her expression pushed me beyond what I could handle. Melissa, who had once been mine, now seemed completely alien. She calmly continued, applying lipstick, and I couldn't hold back from noticing her indifference. It wasn't just cold silence, it was betrayal, openly displayed, as if she didn't notice or didn't want to notice that it was destroying me. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, Melissa, I said, looking at a reflection in the mirror. My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but there was such a steel threat in it that I surprised myself with my restraint. It seemed like she should have understood this wasn't just a conversation. It was a warning, yet she didn't turn, continuing to slowly apply lipstick as if everything happening around her was just part of her morning routine. It's none of your business. She dismissed me, as if I weren't there, as if I weren't her past, as if I hadn't been the one who was once her whole world. You can't control me. Those words were the final straw. They were cold to the core, not even trying to hide that she had already left. I turned away, clenched my teeth, and walked out, slamming the door. But inside me, an idea was forming, a plan. Melissa had made her choice, and it was time to show her that the consequences of that choice would be something she could never have imagined. The world in Greybook was small, and rumors spread faster than any car. I knew where her new man was, Mike, a lawyer who thought of himself as above everyone else, and although I only knew him on a surface level, that was enough for me to understand. People like him had always irritated me. They didn't see the dirt under their nails, thought themselves flawless, and weren't afraid to play with fire. The night was cold, a fine drizzle, like a net, tightly closed off the horizons, blending the city into a gray blur. I stood by his office, watching as he locked the door and headed toward his car. In his expensive suit, everything I despised was present, the arrogance with which he looked at the world, and the invisible smugness. Mike, right. I stepped out from the shadows, keeping my calm in check. He turned, shock crossing his face. He clearly hadn't expected to meet someone who knew his name. Yeah, who are you? His voice was cautious but confident. He didn't understand who he was dealing with. I didn't answer. My face did it for me. The punch landed square on his jaw, and he immediately staggered back, his body rocking before he collapsed under the hood of his car. No words, only action. This is for sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, I said, leaning down, grabbing him by the collar. My voice was cold, but deep. He tried to shove me off. Hey, are you crazy? He shouted, struggling to free himself. But I didn't give him the chance. Each blow was a response to her indifference, to her betrayal. When he stopped resisting and groaned quietly, I released him, letting him fall to the cold asphalt. Don't you dare get near her, I hissed into his ear. If you want to live, forget her name. That's my last piece of advice. I left him there, beaten and pathetic, and walked away. The feeling of satisfaction was strange. I knew I had left a mark, and he would remember what it meant to intrude on someone's life without understanding the consequences. But at the same time, it didn't calm me. The anger inside me slowly subsided, but its shadow remained. Returning home, I felt emptiness. Everything I had done wouldn't bring her back. All this vengeance was, at times, futile. Melissa had made her choice, and, despite everything, I understood that there was no going back. We were strangers now. The apartment was dark. I opened a bottle and took a swig. The taste of alcohol was bitter, but it seemed to clear my thoughts, as if purging everything unnecessary. I wasn't weak, and despite everything that had happened, I knew I would move forward. Grapek had taught me not to be naive. It had taught me that every choice has its price. Grapek had taught me that vengeance wasn't just an act of rage. Vengeance was a way to regain control. It was a reminder that everything comes with a cost, and I had paid that cost when I let myself believe in our bright future. Now, it was time to get revenge on Melissa. Several days had passed since I left Mike on the asphalt. The anger that once burned fiercely in my chest had faded, but the emptiness it left behind, like a hole in my heart, continued to pull at me, and all of this was because of her. Melissa, she had once pulled me out of the darkest pit, but now, without a second thought, she had thrown me back into the abyss. It seemed like everything was over, but I couldn't just let go of her. I couldn't leave her without consequences. Revenge wasn't driven by emotions. It was my duty. I had to make her choice painfully obvious. Melissa was too smart and careful to leave herself vulnerable. She knew how to control the situation, always played one step ahead, and her life was the perfect illusion of strength and independence. But I knew everyone has a weakness, and her weakness was simply her career. Her job was her greatest achievement and her pride. She worked at one of the largest advertising agencies in the city, and her professional reputation stood on a pedestal. Everything she built was like a house of glass, and I was ready to do everything to shatter it. I began with small, almost imperceptible steps, but each one left its mark. A few data leaks, whispers behind her back, casual remarks that started to spark doubts about whether her projects were as successful as she claimed. Everything was done with incredible precision and secrecy. I knew her reputation was her foundation. If it crumbled, so would her world, and soon, her agency began to lose clients. Contracts were falling apart. The projects she led began to lose their value. I saw how she started to panic. The crack in her confidence was widening. She tried to figure out what was happening, but she couldn't grasp that I was behind all of it. It took several weeks before she finally decided to confront me, and now, standing before me, was no longer the confident, authoritative woman who once decided how and when to lead my life. This was a woman watching everything she had worked for fall apart. Her career was crumbling before her eyes, and she couldn't handle it. "Are you out of your mind?" Her voice trembled, but there was no longer anger in it, only fear. The fear I immediately recognized. She was afraid that everything she had built was now falling apart, and she couldn't stop it. "You did this, didn't you?" Her gaze was tense, but now it was full of panic. She was searching for an explanation, for someone to blame, but she knew the answer was standing right in front of her. It was me. It was the fact that her world was falling apart, and she couldn't do anything about it. I remained silent. I silently looked at her, as if she were a stranger. This wasn't the Melissa who had once been a part of my life. Now, she was only part of my revenge. "Did you ever think that the consequences of your actions might be far worse than you thought?" I said, and my words weren't filled with anger, only the cold realization that her choice couldn't go without consequences. "You destroyed everything we had. You betrayed me, and now you'll pay for it." Her face went pale, and she fell silent. I saw the moment she understood. She couldn't control anything anymore. Everything she had built was falling apart, and there was nothing she could do to change it. But I didn't care. I wasn't looking for her fear. I was looking for a realization that her choice wasn't just a mistake, it was a destructive mistake, and she would pay for it. "Leave," I said calmly. I felt nothing but the emptiness that had now become a part of me. I was far from anger or pain. I was empty, and emptiness was my weapon. "You chose your path. It's yours now. Don't try to find excuses." She left silently, and I stood there, emotionless. There was no relief, no triumph. My revenge wasn't about making her suffer. My revenge was making her understand there are no easy solutions, no unpunished actions. Everything comes at a price, and every choice leads to consequences. Melissa became part of my past. I had completed my revenge, and now, at last, I was free. Free from her lies, from what she had once meant to me. There would be no more certainty in her life. Now, she would remember that for every action, for every step, for every word, there is a price.